The Great Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with tension as representatives from dozens of worlds gathered to witness what many called the trial of the century. At the center of it all stood Ambassador Elena Martinez, her weathered face calm despite the chaos surrounding her. She represented the last free humans in the galaxy, and today would decide their fate. The Karathi judge, a towering figure with silver scales and cold yellow eyes, raised his clawed hand for silence. His voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. The humans have been found guilty of the Terra incident. Their reckless colony ship destroyed our sacred breeding grounds on Karathi Prime's moon. Thousands of our young died because of human carelessness. Elena stepped forward. Your Honor, it was an accident. Our navigation systems failed during the solar storm. We tried to change course, but— Silence! The judge's roar cut her off. The damage is done. Your species has proven too dangerous to remain among civilized worlds. The Council has reached its decision. Around the hall, alien representatives whispered among themselves. Some looked sympathetic, but most seemed relieved. Humans had always been the outsiders in galactic society. They were too aggressive, too unpredictable, too different from the established order. The judge continued, By the power of the Galactic Council, all humans are hereby exiled from civilized space. You will be transported to Kepler 442c, a dead world on the galaxy's edge. There you will remain until the end of your days. Elena's heart sank. She had expected punishment, but not this. Your Honor, that planet cannot support life. You're sentencing 50,000 innocent people to death. That is no longer our concern, the judge replied coldly. Perhaps your species will learn humility in their final days. The trial was over. Guards surrounded Elena and her small diplomatic team, leading them away as the council moved on to other business. Within hours, the great ships began gathering humans from across the galaxy. Families were torn from their homes on mining colonies, research stations, and trading posts. Scientists, farmers, engineers, teachers, children, and elderly all were loaded onto transport vessels like cargo. The journey to Kepler 442c took 3 weeks. The transports were cramped and poorly supplied, clearly meant for short trips, not long voyages. Elena moved through the ships, trying to keep spirits up and organize the chaos. She found herself working with people she had never met before. Dr. Lisa Park, a microbiologist from the Titan Research Station, Marcus Webb, a mining engineer from the asteroid belt, Joe Collins, a farmer from the agricultural world of New Kansas. What do we know about this planet? Elena asked during one of their planning meetings in the transport's cargo hold. Dr. Park pulled up data on her tablet. It's bad. Very bad. The atmosphere is mostly carbon dioxide and methane. No oxygen. Surface temperature ranges from -40 to +60 degrees Celsius. Constant radiation storms from the nearby pulsar. No water we can detect. Marcus shook his head. The Karathi aren't just exiling us. They're executing us slowly. Maybe that's what they want us to think, Joe said quietly. The old farmer had been listening carefully. But humans have survived in harsh places before. Our ancestors lived through ice ages, droughts, and plagues. Maybe we can survive this too. Elena looked around at the crowded cargo hold, filled with frightened families and crying children. We have to try, we have no choice. When the transports finally reached Kepler 442c, the sight through the viewports was heartbreaking. The planet looked like a diseased eye staring back at them, gray and brown with swirling toxic clouds and no sign of life anywhere. The transport, pilots, alien mercenaries hired by the Karathi, wasted no time. They landed at the first flat area they found and began unloading their human cargo. The air outside was poison. Everyone had to wear emergency breathing masks, but they only had a few hours of air each. The Karathi had been generous enough to provide basic survival supplies, some prefab shelters, water recyclers, food for maybe 2 months, and basic tools. It was barely enough to set up a temporary camp, let alone build a permanent settlement. This is it, announced the lead pilot, a bug-like creature with multiple eyes. Don't try to signal for rescue. No one is coming back for you. This system is now marked as quarantined. Any ship that comes here will be destroyed. The transports lifted off immediately, leaving the humans alone on the hostile world. Elena stood with the other leaders, watching the ships disappear into the toxic sky. Around them, 50,000 humans began the grim work of trying to survive. The first night was terrible. The prefab shelters could only hold about half the population. The rest had to crowd together in the transport containers that had been left behind. The temperature dropped to -30 degrees, and the wind howled like a living thing. Several elderly people died from the cold and stress. Dr. Park worked frantically with the water recyclers, trying to process the ice they had found in shallow deposits. The machines kept breaking down from the acidic compounds in the frozen water. Marcus led teams to set up the air processors, but they were only meant for small groups, not thousands of people. Joe organized the food distribution, rationing everything carefully. At this rate, we have maybe 60 days before we start starving, he told Elena privately. The second day brought new horrors. A radiation storm swept across their camp, forcing everyone into the deepest shelters they could find. 3 people died from exposure, and dozens more became sick. The emergency medical supplies were already running low. Elena called a meeting of all the group leaders that evening. They gathered in the largest shelter, a cramped space meant for 20 people but holding 50. The faces around her were grim, but she also saw something else: determination. "We all know the situation," she began. "The Karathi expect us to die here. Maybe they're right. Maybe this planet will kill us all. But I'm not ready to give up, and I don't think you are either." Marcus nodded grimly. "The mining equipment in the containers might help us dig deeper shelters. Get us away from the radiation. The water recyclers can be modified," Dr. Park added. "I've been studying the chemical composition of the ice. It's toxic, but not impossible to clean. We just need time to figure out how." Joe leaned forward. "I've been looking at the soil samples. It's poisonous to earth plants, but maybe we can change that. I've seen farmers reclaim dead land before." An old woman in the corner spoke up. "My grandmother survived the resource wars on Earth. She always said humans are like weeds, we grow where nothing else can." Elena felt a spark of hope. "Then we start tomorrow. We're not going to just survive. We're going to prove them wrong. This planet thinks it can kill us, but it doesn't know humans very well." Over the next few days, the camp began to organize itself. People were assigned to teams based on their skills. Engineers worked on expanding the shelters and improving the life support systems. Scientists studied the planet's harsh environment, looking for anything they could use. Medical teams treated the sick and rationed their dwindling supplies. Children were kept busy with lessons and games, shielding them from the worst of the adult fears. Teachers worked with parents to maintain some sense of normalcy, even in the poisonous wasteland. Elena found herself becoming the unofficial leader of the entire settlement. People came to her with problems, disputes, and ideas. She realized that their survival would depend not just on technology and resources, but on staying united. In the face of impossible odds, they had to remain human. The Karathi had exiled them to this dead world, expecting them to fade away quietly. They had stripped away their advanced technology, their comfortable lives, their connection to the galaxy, but they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated what humans could do when they had nothing left to lose. As Elena stood outside the main shelter on their 10th night, looking up at the alien stars through her breathing mask, she made a promise to herself and to everyone depending on her. They would not just survive on this dead planet. Somehow, some way, they would make it live. The first winter on Kepler 442c was a nightmare that tested every human on the planet. 3 months after their exile, the settlement had already lost over 2,000 people to radiation sickness, equipment failures, and the brutal cold that could freeze a person solid in minutes. Elena Martinez stood in the main command shelter, studying the grim numbers on her tablet. The settlement's population had dropped from 50,000 to 47,800. Each number represented a person Someone's parent, child, or friend who had died in this poisonous wasteland. The water recyclers are failing faster than we can fix them, Dr. Lisa Park reported, her face drawn with exhaustion. She had been working 18-hour days trying to keep their life support systems running. We've lost 3 more units this week. The acid in the ice is eating through the filters. Marcus Webb looked up from his engineering reports. The radiation shielding on Shelter Block C is cracked. We need to evacuate 50 families, but we don't have anywhere to put them. His hands were stained with chemical burns from handling the toxic materials they used for repairs. Joe Collins entered the shelter, shaking ice crystals from his jacket. The greenhouse domes are holding, but barely. I lost another crop section yesterday. The soil treatment isn't working fast enough. The old farmer had aged 10 years in the past few months, but his eyes still held determination. Elena nodded grimly. What about the deep mining operation? We've hit a layer of bedrock. That's harder than anything we've seen, Marcus replied. The drilling equipment is wearing out and we can't replace it. But we did find something interesting. Mineral deposits that might be useful if we can figure out how to process them. The early days had been pure survival. They had quickly learned that the prefab shelters provided by the Karathi were death traps. The thin walls couldn't handle the temperature swings, and the air recycling systems broke down constantly. Marcus had organized teams to cannibalize the transport containers, using the metal plating to reinforce their shelters and build new ones. The breakthrough came when they realized they had to go underground. The surface was too hostile, with radiation storms that could kill a person in hours and temperature swings that cracked metal. Marcus led the effort to dig deep into the planet's crust, using mining equipment salvaged from the transport ships. We're not just hiding from this planet, he had told his workers. We're going to make it work for us. The underground tunnels became their lifeline. 30 feet below the surface, the temperature was more stable, and the rock provided natural radiation shielding. They carved out living spaces, workshops, and storage areas. It was cramped and dark, but it was safe. Dr. Park's work with the water recycling systems had become critical to their survival. The ice deposits they found were full of toxic compounds that would kill anyone who drank them. But she discovered that certain bacteria from Earth could actually process some of these toxins. It's like a puzzle, she explained to Elena during one of their evening briefings. These bacteria evolved to handle pollution on Earth. Here, they're finding new things to eat. I've been cultivating different strains, trying to find ones that can handle the worst compounds. Her laboratory was a converted storage container filled with jury-rigged equipment. She worked with test tubes and microscopes that had been salvaged from the transport ship's medical bays. Every day brought new experiments, new failures, and occasionally small successes. The food situation was desperate. Joe Collins had been trying to grow earth crops in the alien soil, but everything kept dying. The soil was not just barren, it was actively hostile to earth life. It contained heavy metals and acids that burned plant roots. I've been thinking about this wrong, Joe told Elena one day. I've been trying to make earth plants grow in alien soil. But maybe I need to change the soil first. He began working with Dr. Park to develop soil treatments. They used ash from their fires, organic waste from the settlement, and even human waste to create compost. Slowly, very slowly, they began to see results. The first earth plant to grow in the treated soil was a potato, tough, hardy, and able to survive in harsh conditions. It's not much, Joe said, holding up the small, misshapen potato. But it's life, real earth life growing in alien soil. The success gave everyone hope, but it also highlighted how much work they still had to do. One potato plant could not feed 50,000 people. They needed to scale up everything: the soil treatment, the growing areas, the seed supplies. The children were both the settlement's greatest hope and its greatest worry. They adapted to the harsh conditions better than adults, but they were also more vulnerable to radiation and disease. Elena made sure that the children's areas were the best protected spaces in the settlement. A woman named Kate Thompson organized the children's education. She had been a teacher on New Kansas before the exile, and she refused to let the children's learning stop just because they were stranded on a dead planet. These kids are going to grow up here, she told Elena. They need to know how to survive, but they also need to know that they're still human. They need stories, math, science, art, all of it. The children's classes were held in a converted cargo container, decorated with drawings and maps of Earth. Kate taught them about their home planet, but she also taught them about Kepler 442c. The children learned to identify dangerous radiation levels, to spot signs of equipment failure, and to work together in teams. One of the children, a 10-year-old boy named Tommy, became fascinated with the mining operations. He would spend hours watching Marcus and his team's work, asking endless questions about the equipment and the mineral samples. "This rock is different from the others," Tommy told Marcus one day, holding up a sample he had found. "It's heavier, and it has these little crystal things in it." Marcus examined the sample and his eyes widened. The boy had found a deposit of rare earth metals, materials that could be used to build advanced electronics. It was exactly what they needed to repair and upgrade their failing equipment. "Good eye, kid," Marcus said, ruffling Tommy's hair. "You might just have saved us all." The discovery led to a new mining operation focused on extracting these valuable materials. It was dangerous work in the unstable underground tunnels, but it gave them access to resources they desperately needed. As the months passed, the settlement began to develop its own culture and routines. People worked in shifts to keep the critical systems running 24 hours a day. Meals were communal affairs in the main gathering spaces, with everyone sharing whatever food was available. Elena found herself making decisions that no human leader had ever faced before. When the medical supplies ran low, she had to decide who got treatment and who didn't. When food was scarce, she had to choose between feeding the workers who kept the systems running and the children who represented their future. "I never wanted to be a leader," she confided to Dr. Park one evening. "I was just a diplomat. I dealt with trade agreements and cultural exchanges. I never had to decide who lives and who dies." "None of us wanted this," Dr. Park replied. "But we're the ones who are here. We're the ones who have to make it work." The worst crisis came during month 8, when a massive radiation storm hit the settlement. The early warning systems failed, and the storm was stronger than anything they had experienced before. The surface installations were destroyed, and several underground areas were flooded when the ice melted and then refroze, cracking the tunnel walls. They lost over 1,000 people in 3 days. The medical facilities were overwhelmed, and the surviving equipment was pushed beyond its limits. For a moment, it seemed like the planet had finally won. But then something remarkable happened. The survivors didn't give up. They worked together to rebuild, to rescue the trapped, to care for the wounded. They shared their last food rations and gave their only warm clothes to the sick. Elena watched from the command shelter as people she had never seen before worked side by side to repair the damage. A former corporate executive was carrying supplies for a teenage apprentice mechanic. A retired professor was helping a young mother care for her children while she worked on repairing the water systems. "We're not the same people who were exiled here," she realized. The soft, civilized humans who had depended on galactic society for everything were gone. In their place were harder, tougher people who had learned to survive in hell itself. The first year ended with the settlement still alive, though barely. They had lost over 8,000 people, but the survivors were stronger, more united, and more determined than ever. As Elena looked around at the faces in the command shelter, weathered by radiation, scarred by hard work, but still hopeful, she knew that they had passed their first test. The dead planet had tried to kill them, but they were still here, still human, still fighting, and they were just getting started. 5 years had passed since the exile, and Kepler 442c was no longer the same dead world that had greeted the first human settlers. What had once been a barren wasteland was now dotted with strange silver domes that gleamed against the toxic sky. Steam rose from hidden vents, and the sound of machinery hummed beneath the ground. Elena Martinez, now showing gray in her hair and lines around her eyes, stood on the observation deck of Central Command. The structure had been built into a hillside, its walls made from processed local minerals that sparkled with an inner light. Through the reinforced windows, she could see the settlement that had grown from desperate survival into something approaching civilization. The atmospheric processors are working better than we hoped, Dr. Lisa Park reported, joining Elena at the window. She looked different now, tougher, with calloused hands and burn scars from years of dangerous experiments. Dome 7 achieved 80% Earth-normal atmosphere yesterday. We're actually breathing real air in there. The breakthrough had come in year 3, when Dr. Park's bacterial experiments had finally yielded results. She had been working with Earth bacteria, trying to find strains that could survive in the toxic environment. Most died within hours, but a few adapted in unexpected ways. It started with accident, Dr. Park explained to the weekly settlement meeting. I had contaminated samples sitting in the lab when a radiation storm hit. When I came back, the bacteria hadn't just survived, they had multiplied, and they were producing oxygen. The discovery had changed everything. The bacteria were consuming the toxic compounds in the atmosphere and converting them into breathable gases. Dr. Park and her team had spent months learning to cultivate and control the process, but eventually, they had created their first atmospheric processor, a building-sized machine that could slowly transform the air inside a sealed dome. The domes themselves were Marcus Webb's masterpiece. The mining engineer had become the settlement's chief architect, designing structures that could withstand the planet's harsh conditions while housing the atmospheric processors. Each dome was built from refined local materials, metals and crystals, extracted from the planet's crust and processed in furnaces that Marcus had built from salvaged parts. The new dome design is 30% more efficient, Marcus explained to Elena as they walked through construction site 12. Around them, workers in radiation suits were assembling the framework for another dome. We're using the crystalline formations we found in the deep mines. They're incredible. They actually store and focus energy. One of these crystals can power a life support system for a week. The workers had changed too. These weren't the soft colonists who had been exiled 5 years ago. They moved with purpose and efficiency, their bodies hardened by years of dangerous work. They knew their equipment inside and out, because their lives depended on it working perfectly. Joe Collins had become the settlement's agricultural director, overseeing food production that now fed over 45,000 people. The population had recovered from the disasters of the first years, and new children were being born who had never known any world but Kepler 4M42c. The crop yields are up 20% this season, Joe reported, leading Elena through Agricultural Dome 3. Inside the dome, neat rows of vegetables grew under artificial lights, their roots extending into specially treated soil. The soil treatment process is working so well that we're actually improving the quality of the land. The breakthrough in agriculture had come from understanding the planet's unique chemistry. The toxic compounds that killed Earth plants could be neutralized and converted into nutrients through a complex process involving bacteria, heat treatment, and careful chemical balance. Joe had worked with Dr. Park to develop soil that was actually more fertile than many Earth farmlands. See these tomatoes? Joe pointed to plants heavy with red fruit. They're bigger and more nutritious than anything I grew on New Kansas. This planet is teaching us things about farming that we never knew. The children born on Kepler 442c were different from their parents in subtle ways. They adapted to the lower gravity and higher radiation levels better than adults. They learned to read atmospheric readings and equipment diagnostics as easily as children on Earth learned to read books. Tommy, the boy who had discovered the rare Earth deposits, was now 15 and working as an apprentice to Marcus. He moved through the settlement's tunnels and workshops with complete confidence, equally comfortable with advanced electronics and heavy machinery. The new power grid is almost ready, Tommy reported to Elena during her weekly rounds. We're using the crystal arrays to store energy from the geothermal plants. When the next radiation storm hits, we'll actually be able to harvest power from it instead of hiding. The idea of harvesting energy from radiation storms had come from the children. They approached problems differently than adults without preconceived notions about what was possible. Working with the engineering teams, they had developed collector arrays that could capture and store the massive electrical discharges from the storms. Dr. Park's laboratory had evolved into a full research complex, with teams working on dozens of different projects. The bacterial research had branched out into new areas: waste processing, mineral extraction, even primitive manufacturing at the cellular level. "We're not just surviving anymore," Dr. Park told Elena during a tour of the research facilities. "We're innovating. Some of the things we're discovering here could revolutionize science if we ever get back to the galaxy." One of her most promising projects involved using bacteria to process the planet's unusual mineral deposits. The bacteria could extract pure metals and rare compounds from ore that would be impossible to refine using traditional methods. It was slow, but it produced materials of incredible purity and strength. The settlement's manufacturing capabilities had grown far beyond simple repairs and maintenance. They were now producing advanced electronics, precision tools, and even experimental spacecraft components. The workshops hummed with activity as teams worked on projects that pushed the boundaries of human engineering. Marcus had established a technical college where experienced workers taught younger people the skills they would need to keep the settlement running. The classes covered everything from basic electronics to advanced metallurgy, but they also included subjects that no Earth school had ever taught: radiation storm prediction, toxic atmosphere processing, and survival engineering. "These kids are learning things that no human has ever known before," Marcus told Elena. "They're becoming a new kind of engineer, adapted to conditions that would kill most people from the civilized galaxy." The settlement's social structure had evolved too. Leadership positions were earned through competence and dedication rather than political connections. People were valued for their skills and contributions, not their backgrounds or previous status. Elena found herself working closely with a council of department heads who had emerged as natural leaders. Dr. Park oversaw all scientific research. Marcus managed construction and engineering. Joe ran agricultural operations. Kate Thompson had become education director, overseeing both the children's schools and the technical training programs. "We're becoming something new," Elena observed during one of their planning meetings. "We're not the same species that was exiled here. We're harder, smarter, more adaptable." The evidence was everywhere. The settlement now had manufacturing facilities that could produce complex electronics from raw materials. The agricultural domes were yielding surplus food that was being processed and stored. The population was growing again, with new families choosing to have children despite the harsh conditions. Most remarkably, they had begun to expand beyond the original settlement site. Survey teams were exploring other regions of the planet, looking for additional resources and suitable locations for new domes. Some areas showed signs of geothermal activity that could provide abundant energy. Others had unique mineral formations that could be valuable for manufacturing. "We found something amazing in the northern continent," reported Captain Sarah Kim, who led the exploration teams. She was one of the new generation of leaders who had emerged during the settlement's growth. Tough, capable people who had proven themselves through action rather than appointment. "There's a valley system where the atmospheric conditions are naturally less toxic. With minimal processing, we could establish surface settlements there. We're talking about living in the open air for the first time since the exile." The prospect of surface settlements was exciting, but it also raised new challenges. The settlement would need to develop transportation systems to connect distant locations. They would need to establish communication networks and supply chains. They were approaching the complexity of a true planetary civilization. Elena often stood on the observation deck in the evenings, watching the lights of the settlement spread out below her. The sight never failed to amaze her. 5 years ago, this had been a dead world where nothing could survive. Now it was home to a thriving human community that was pushing the boundaries of what was possible. The children who had been born here didn't think of Kepler 442c as a place of exile. To them, it was simply home. They played in the domes and tunnels with the confidence of people who belonged. They learned about Earth from books. 20 years had passed since the first humans set foot on Kepler 442c, and the planet was unrecognizable. Where once there had been only toxic wasteland, now sprawling cities stretched across the landscape under protective domes that glittered like jewels against the alien sky. The transformation was so complete that visitors from Earth's golden age would have struggled to believe this was the same dead world. Elena Martinez, now in her 60s, with silver hair and a face marked by decades of hard decisions stood in the central tower of New Haven City. The city was the largest of 7 major settlements that dotted the planet's surface, each one a marvel of human engineering and determination. Through the massive windows, she could see the bustling streets below, filled with people who had been born and raised on this world. The population census is complete, reported Director Kate Thompson, who had grown from a simple teacher into the settlement's chief administrator. 215,000 people across all settlements. The birth rate is stable, and we're seeing the first generation of children whose grandparents were born here. The numbers were staggering. From the original 50,000 exiles, minus the 8,000 lost in the early years, the population had grown to over 200,000. This wasn't just survival. It was a population boom that showed how completely humans had adapted to their new world. Captain Alex Rivers entered the office, still wearing the dust-stained uniform of a space pilot. At 35, he had been born on Kepler 442c and had never known any other world. He represented the new generation of humans who thought of the toxic storms and radiation as natural parts of life. The trading mission to the Kepler system was a complete success, he reported with satisfaction. The independent merchants were amazed by our technology. They're calling our atmospheric processors miracle machines and our quantum computers impossible magic. We've established regular trade routes with 5 different worlds. The development of interstellar travel had been one of the settlement's greatest achievements. Using the unique crystalline formations found deep in the planet's crust, human engineers had developed quantum computing systems that surpassed anything in the known galaxy. These computers could calculate navigation routes through the dangerous radiation fields that surrounded Kepler 442c, allowing ships to travel safely between star systems. Dr. Lisa Park, now the settlement's chief scientist, joined the meeting. Her hair was white and her hands were permanently stained from decades of chemical work, but her mind was as sharp as ever. She had become the mother of an entirely new branch of science, what the settlers called hostile world engineering. The atmospheric processors are working beyond our wildest dreams, she reported. We now have 12 major dome cities with Earth-normal atmosphere, and we're working on a project to terraform an entire continent. The bacterial colonies we've developed don't just clean the air, they're actually improving it. The oxygen levels in some domes are higher than Earth standard. The scientific advances had been remarkable. Working with limited resources and under impossible conditions, the human scientists had developed technologies that seemed almost magical. They had learned to program bacteria to do precise work, to grow living machines that could repair themselves, and to harvest energy from sources that the civilized galaxy had never imagined. Marcus Webb, now chief of planetary engineering, spread holographic displays across the conference table. The images showed construction projects that would have challenged the greatest civilizations in the galaxy. Massive towers rose from the planet's surface, connected by enclosed bridges that spanned kilometers. Underground cities burrowed deep into the planet's crust, their walls lined with the glowing crystals that provided both power and light. The orbital station project is ahead of schedule, Marcus reported. We'll have our first space-based manufacturing facility operational within 2 years. The microgravity environment will let us grow crystals that are impossible to create on the surface. The orbital stations were perhaps the most ambitious project yet attempted. Using materials mined from the planet's crust and refined through bacterial processing, human engineers were building permanent installations in orbit around Kepler 442c. These stations would serve as shipyards, research facilities, and gateways to the galaxy beyond. The children of Kepler 442c had grown into adults who were fundamentally different from their parents. They moved with casual confidence in environments that would kill most galactic citizens within minutes. They understood complex scientific concepts that the best universities in the galaxy struggled to teach. They were equally comfortable with advanced technology and primitive survival skills. Tommy, the boy who had discovered the first rare Earth deposits, was now 35 and served as the settlement's chief resource manager. He had spent his entire adult life exploring the planet's hidden treasures, mapping mineral deposits and geological formations that held the keys to humanity's future. The deep core samples are showing something extraordinary, he reported to the weekly council meeting. There's a layer of crystalline formations about 2 kilometers down that spans the entire planet. If we can tap into it, we'll have enough energy to power our civilization for thousands of years. The planet's geology had turned out to be far more complex than anyone had imagined. The toxic surface conditions were caused by relatively recent volcanic activity, but beneath the poison crust lay treasures that made the world invaluable. Rare metals, energy-storing crystals, and geological formations that could be used for advanced manufacturing were scattered throughout the planet's depths. The social structure of the settlements had evolved into something unique in the galaxy. Leadership was based on competence and merit rather than politics or wealth. People were valued for their contributions to the community's survival and growth. The harsh conditions had eliminated many of the social problems that plagued civilized worlds. There was no room for corruption, laziness, or selfishness when everyone's survival depended on working together. Elena often walked through the settlements in the evening, observing how the community had developed. Children played in parks under artificial skies, their laughter echoing through the domes. Adults worked in workshops and laboratories, pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. Elderly people shared stories of Earth and the early days of the settlement, keeping the community's history alive. We've become something the galaxy has never seen before, Elena reflected during one of her conversations with Dr. Park. We're not just another human colony. We're a new kind of civilization. The evidence was everywhere. The settlements produced technology that was more advanced than anything in the Karathi Empire. Their manufacturing techniques were cleaner and more efficient than the standard galactic methods. Their social systems were more stable and fair than the hierarchical structures that dominated civilized space. Most importantly, they were completely self-sufficient. They grew their own food, manufactured their own equipment, and generated their own energy. They had no need for imports from the galaxy, but they had plenty of exports that other worlds desperately wanted. The quantum computers built on Kepler 442c could perform calculations that required entire facilities on other worlds. The atmospheric processors could make any world habitable within a few years. The bacterial manufacturing systems could produce pure materials from the most contaminated sources. We're getting requests from independent worlds throughout the galaxy, Captain Rivers reported during one of his briefings. They want to hire us to help with their environmental problems. Some of them are offering incredible amounts of money for just one atmospheric processor. The irony was not lost on Elena. The same technology that had saved humanity from extinction was now in high demand throughout the galaxy. The dead world that was supposed to be their grave had become the source of their greatest strength. The trading missions had also brought disturbing news about the galaxy beyond. The Karathi Empire was facing internal problems, resource shortages, environmental damage, and social unrest. Their rigid social system was breaking down as younger generations questioned the old ways of doing things. Some of the independent merchants are asking about asylum, Captain Rivers reported. They want to come here, to learn our ways. They say their own worlds are becoming unlivable. Elena was not surprised. The same arrogance and rigid thinking that had led the Karathi to exile humanity was now causing problems throughout their empire. They had always believed that their way was the only way, that their technology and social systems were superior to all others. Now they were discovering that their approach had serious flaws. The settlements on Kepler 442c had proven that there were other ways to build a civilization. They had shown that cooperation was stronger than hierarchy, that innovation was more valuable than tradition, and that adaptation was better than rigid adherence to old methods. We need to start thinking about our role in the galaxy, Elena told the council during their strategic planning session. We're not just survivors anymore. We're not even just a successful colony. We're becoming a major power, whether we want to or not. The transformation was complete. The humans exiled to a dead world had not just survived. They had thrived beyond anyone's wildest imagination. 40 years after the exile, the Karathi Imperial fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. expecting to find the scattered bones of a failed human settlement. Instead, Admiral Zektar found himself staring at something that defied every assumption his species had held about the universe. "This cannot be correct," the Admiral muttered, his scaled hands gripping the command chair as he studied the sensor readings. The scanners show massive energy signatures, orbital installations, and... are those ships? His aide, Commander Velkan, checked the instruments twice before responding. "Sir, we're detecting at least 50 spacecraft of unknown design in orbit around the planet. The surface shows multiple cities, atmospheric processors, and what appears to be industrial complexes." Admiral Zektar had been a young officer during the human exile. He remembered the trial, the speeches about teaching the lesser species their place in the galaxy. The dead planet was supposed to be a warning to other worlds about the consequences of defying the Karathi Empire. "Establish communication with the human settlement," he ordered. "They will surrender immediately and prepare for reintegration into civilized society." The response came not from a desperate survival bunker, but from a gleaming orbital station that dwarfed the largest Karathi installations. The human who appeared on the view screen was a middle-aged woman with graying hair and confident eyes that showed no fear of the Imperial fleet. "I am President Maria Santos of the Human Coalition," she said calmly. "Welcome to Kepler 442c, Admiral. We've been expecting you." Maria Santos had been elected president 3 years earlier, following Elena Martinez's retirement. She had been born on Kepler 442c and had never known any world but this one. To her, the toxic storms and radiation fields were as natural as sunshine had been to her parents' generation on Earth. "I am Admiral Zektar of the Karathi Imperial Navy," he replied, trying to maintain his authority despite his shock at the sophisticated communication system. "By order of the Galactic Council, you will prepare for immediate evacuation and return to designated human settlements within the Empire." Maria's expression didn't change, but there was something in her eyes that made the Admiral uncomfortable. It was the look of someone who held all the advantages and knew it. "That's a generous offer, Admiral, but we must decline. Kepler 442c is our home now. We have no intention of leaving." Behind Maria, through the viewports of the orbital station, the Admiral could see a bustling city in space. Ships moved between docking ports, and humans in environmental suits worked on construction projects that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The technology on display was clearly beyond anything the Karathi possessed. "You do not have a choice in this matter," Admiral Zektar said, his voice rising. "The Karathi Empire has decided to show mercy and readmit humanity to galactic society. You will comply." "Will we?" Maria asked with a slight smile. "Captain Rivers, would you please demonstrate our position?" The space around the Karathi fleet suddenly filled with activity. Ships appeared from behind asteroids and planetary debris where they had been hidden. The vessels were unlike anything the Admiral had ever seen, sleek, crystalline structures that seemed to bend light around them. They moved with impossible speed and agility, surrounding the Imperial fleet in a matter of minutes. "How many ships do they have?" Admiral Zektar demanded. "Over 200, sir," Commander Velkan replied, his voice shaking. "And, sir, our weapon systems aren't responding. Something is interfering with our targeting computers." Captain Alex Rivers appeared on a secondary communication channel, his voice calm and professional. "Admiral, your ships are currently experiencing technical difficulties due to our quantum interference systems. Your weapons and navigation are temporarily disabled for your own safety." The Admiral felt a chill run down his spine. The humans had not just survived on the dead planet. They had developed technology that could neutralize the most advanced warships in the galaxy without firing a shot. "This is impossible," he whispered. "Your species was barely capable of basic space travel when you were exiled." 40 years is a long time, Admiral," President Santos replied. "We've learned a great deal about survival, adaptation, and innovation. Would you like a tour of our facilities? I think you'll find our achievements quite impressive." The tour was a revelation that shattered every assumption the Karathi had held about human capabilities. The orbital stations were marvels of engineering that utilized technologies the Empire's best scientists couldn't comprehend. The planetary cities existed in environments that would kill most galactic species within minutes, yet humans lived there comfortably, even thriving. Dr. Lisa Park, now in her 80s but still sharp as ever, led the scientific demonstration. She showed the Karathi delegation bacterial manufacturing systems that could produce pure materials from toxic waste, atmospheric processors that could terraform entire continents, and quantum computers that solved problems in seconds that would take Karathi systems years to calculate. "We've had to develop solutions to problems your empire has never faced," she explained to the stunned alien visitors. "When you're exiled to a world that actively tries to kill you, you either innovate or die. We chose to innovate." The Karathi delegation was escorted through manufacturing facilities where humans worked alongside living machines grown from modified bacteria. They saw farms producing food in soil that had been toxic wasteland 4 decades earlier. They witnessed children learning advanced physics and engineering as naturally as their own young learned basic mathematics. Commander Velkan, who served as the delegation's technical expert, was particularly shaken by what he observed. "These aren't the same humans we exiled," he reported to Admiral Zektar. "They've become something else entirely. Their technology is decades ahead of ours in critical areas." The social structure of the human settlements was equally impressive. The Karathi observers expected to find the rigid hierarchies and power, struggles that characterize their own society. Instead, they found a cooperative system where leadership was based on competence and contribution rather than birth or political connections. Tommy, now the settlement's chief resource coordinator, explained their approach during a meeting with the Karathi delegation. "We couldn't afford the luxury of inefficient leadership. When everyone's survival depends on making the right decisions, you naturally choose the people who make the best choices." The economic implications were staggering. The human settlements were completely self-sufficient and produced surplus goods that were in high demand throughout the galaxy. Independent traders were already establishing regular routes to Kepler 442c, bringing news and resources from dozens of worlds. "Half the independent systems in this sector want to establish trade agreements with us," Captain Rivers reported to President Santos during a private briefing. "They're offering incredible terms for our technology and expertise." Admiral Zektar found himself in an impossible position. He had come to collect a failed human colony, and instead discovered a thriving civilization that surpassed the Karathi Empire in several critical technologies. His superiors expected him to return with submissive humans ready to accept their place in the galactic hierarchy. Instead, he was facing a confident, powerful society that had no need for what the Empire offered. "Your people must return to designated settlements," he insisted during his final meeting with President Santos. "The exile was temporary. The Empire is prepared to forgive past transgressions and restore humanity to its proper place in galactic society." President Santos leaned back in her chair, surrounded by advisors who represented the best minds of 2 generations. "And what would that proper place be, Admiral? Second-class citizens in someone else's empire, grateful recipients of Karathi charity? You would have the protection of the Empire, access to galactic markets, participation in civilized society," the Admiral replied, though his words sounded hollow even to himself. "We already have access to galactic markets through our trading partners," Maria pointed out. "As for protection, I think we've demonstrated that we can take care of ourselves. And as for civilized society, well, I think we've built something better than what you're offering." The final demonstration came when a Karathi patrol ship, acting without authorization, attempted to force its way past the human defensive perimeter. The ship found itself gently but irresistibly guided to a safe orbit, its systems completely overridden by human technology. The crew was unharmed but thoroughly humbled. "We could have destroyed your ship in a dozen different ways," Captain Rivers explained to the patrol ship's commander. "Instead, we chose to demonstrate restraint. That's the difference between your civilization and ours." Admiral Zektar realized that his mission had failed completely. The humans were not the desperate exiles he had expected to find. They were a major power in their own right, with technology and resources that made them valuable allies or dangerous enemies. His final report to the Karathi, High Council was a masterpiece of diplomatic understatement. The human settlement has achieved unexpected success. Recommend immediate diplomatic engagement and reconsideration of previous policies. President Santos's response to the Empire's generous offer was broadcast throughout the galaxy, carried by independent traders and transmitted by